You have been lied to, not by a person, not by one bad article, by an entire industry that profits from you believing that belly fat is a willpower problem, that if you just ate less and moved more, the gut would disappear. So you tried, you cut the carbs, you did the crunches, you drank the lemon water, and yet there it is, still sitting on your stomach like it paid rent. Here is the truth they never told you. The fat you can grab with your hand, the soft, squishy layer right under your skin, that fat is almost entirely cosmetic. It is not what is going to kill you. The fat that is actually killing you is the kind you cannot see, cannot pinch, and cannot feel. It is buried deep inside your abdomen, wrapped around your liver, your kidneys, your pancreas, and your heart. It is called visceral fat, and it is not just stored energy sitting there minding its own business. It is biologically active tissue. It behaves like a rogue organ that was never supposed to be there. It releases inflammatory chemicals around the clock. It disrupts your hormones. It drives insulin resistance. And it does all of this silently, invisibly, while you look in the mirror and wonder why your stomach still looks the way it does. But here is where the story gets interesting. Japanese researchers have been studying visceral fat specifically for decades. Not general obesity, not overall body weight, visceral fat. And what they found changes everything. Because it turns out there is a precise biological combination, a sequence of inputs involving specific plant pigments, a particular compound in a drink most people already own, and a very specific movement protocol that, when combined, can strip visceral fat at a speed that is genuinely difficult to believe until you see the data. We are talking about a 48% reduction in 2 months, not total body fat, visceral fat specifically, the dangerous kind. So if you have been doing everything right and nothing is working, stay with me. Because the reason it is not working is not a lack of effort, it is a lack of the right information. Let us start at the root. You need to understand what visceral fat actually is before you can understand how to destroy it. Because most people have the biology completely backwards. Your body has 2 main types of fat storage. The first is subcutaneous fat. This is the stuff directly under your skin. You can pinch it, it jiggles. It is the fat you see on your arms, your thighs, your hips. And while nobody loves it aesthetically, subcutaneous fat is relatively harmless from a health perspective. It is essentially your body's savings account, passive storage. It just sits there. The second type is visceral fat. And visceral fat is nothing like a savings account. It is more like a chemical factory that nobody hired and nobody can fire. Visceral fat cells are metabolically aggressive. They secrete a steady stream of cytokines, which are inflammatory signaling proteins that travel through your bloodstream and damaged tissue. They release free fatty acids directly into the portal vein, which is the blood supply feeding your liver. This is why visceral fat is so tightly linked to non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. And because it constantly disrupts insulin signaling, it progressively makes your cells more and more resistant to insulin, which is the exact mechanism behind type 2 diabetes. So how do you know if you have it? The texture test is your best low-tech tool. Press your stomach firmly. If your belly is soft and you can grab a handful of it, you are mostly dealing with subcutaneous fat. But if your belly protrudes outward and feels solid, almost firm, like there is pressure from the inside pushing out, that is visceral fat. That hardness is the fat pressing against your abdominal wall from the inside out. That is your liver and your organs surrounded. And here is the part nobody talks about. You can have a completely normal body weight and still carry a dangerous amount of visceral fat. Japanese researchers actually coined a term for this, tofai. Thin outside, fat inside. A person can step on a scale, hit a perfectly normal number, and still have visceral fat levels that dramatically elevate their risk of cardiovascular disease and metabolic dysfunction. The scale is measuring the wrong thing entirely. Now let us talk about the Japanese protocol and why this particular approach works when everything else fails. The strategy has 3 pillars. The first involves what you eat, not how much you eat, what specifically you eat, and why those specific foods biochemically target visceral fat at the genetic level. The second involves a specific compound in a drink, one that acts as a molecular key for your fat cells. And the third involves movement, but not the movement you think. In fact, the kind of exercise most people turn to for fat loss, long, brutal, punishing sessions, may actually be making visceral fat worse through cortisol elevation. The Right movement protocol looks nothing like what the fitness industry sells you. Let us start with food. The core of the Japanese dietary approach to visceral fat comes down to a family of compounds called carotenoids. Carotenoids are the pigments that give plants their color, the deep orange of a sweet potato, the vivid red of a bell pepper, the rich green of spinach and kale. These are not just colors, they are antioxidant molecules, and Japanese researchers identified something remarkable about how they interact with visceral fat specifically. Here is the mechanism. Your cells, when exposed to chronic low-grade inflammation, produce unstable molecules called free radicals. Free radicals damage cell membranes, interfere with mitochondrial function, and most importantly for our purposes, they create an internal environment where visceral fat accumulates and becomes resistant to mobilization. Carotenoids neutralize these free radicals. They sweep the environment clean, but that is just the beginning. A double-blind study out of Japan tracked a group of participants who simply added more carotenoid-rich vegetables to their diet, specifically carrots and cabbage, over 8 weeks. No calorie restriction, no other dietary changes, just more color on the plate. The results showed something that goes well beyond simple antioxidant activity. The carotenoids did not just reduce inflammation, they activated specific genes responsible for fat oxidation and simultaneously suppressed the genes that signal fat storage. They flipped the genetic switch. Your body has genes that, when activated, make you more efficient at burning fat as fuel. And you also have genes that, when activated, prioritize fat storage. Carotenoids essentially reach into your gene expression and tell your body to burn rather than store. This is why Japanese dietary patterns, which have historically been rich in daikon, seaweed, pumpkin, carrots, and dark leafy greens, produce such distinctly different visceral fat outcomes compared to diets built around processed beige foods. And that contrast is worth sitting with for a moment. Look at your plate. If the food on it is brown or beige, white bread, pasta, crackers, cereals, packaged anything, it is feeding the inflammatory environment that visceral fat thrives in. If the food is deeply colored, bright orange, dark red, deep green, those pigments are directly working against visceral fat at the biochemical level. This does not need to be complicated. Add 1 serving of a deeply colored vegetable to every single meal, not as a side thought, as the anchor of the plate. Carrots, sweet potatoes, red peppers, spinach, kale. If it is vibrant and it came from the ground, it is working for you. Now let us talk about the drink. Green tea has been consumed in Japan for over 1,000 years. And while the Western world has spent decades dismissing it as a wellness myth, the molecular biology of what is inside green tea is actually extraordinary. The compound we care about is called EGCG, epigallocatechin gallate. It belongs to a class of polyphenols called catechins, and EGCG does 2 things that are directly relevant to visceral fat. First, it increases the activity of norepinephrine, a hormone that signals fat cells to release stored fat for burning. It essentially sends a message to your fat cells that says, "Open up, we need fuel." Second, EGCG inhibits an enzyme called lipase. Lipase is responsible for breaking down dietary fat so your body can absorb it through the gut wall. By suppressing this enzyme, green tea rich in EGCG reduces the amount of dietary fat that actually enters your system. So it is working from 2 directions simultaneously, helping release stored fat and blocking new fat from being absorbed. A randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled trial tracked participants consuming catechin-enriched green tea for 12 weeks. The outcome showed significant reductions in visceral fat. Specifically, not just total body mass. The belly fat went down, the hard, internal organ-surrounding fat. But here is the critical warning. You cannot achieve this effect with a bottle of green tea from a grocery shelf. Most commercially bottled green teas contain so little catechin content that they are effectively sugar water with a green label. What you want is matcha, or properly brewed loose-leaf green tea, consumed without added sugar. Matcha is made from ground whole tea leaves, which means you are consuming the entire leaf, not just a diluted brew. The catechin concentration is dramatically higher. And there is an important synergy here. The natural caffeine in matcha works alongside the EGCG to amplify the effect. Caffeine stimulates thermogenesis, the process of your body generating heat and burning fuel. EGCG unlocks the fat cell to provide that fuel. Together they create a compounding effect that neither achieves as efficiently on its own. 1 matcha per day, no sugar, ideally consumed in the morning or before movement. That is your second pillar. Now we get to the movement piece, and this is where the science becomes almost counterintuitive. Most people, when they decide to attack belly fat, go straight for high-intensity everything. They sprint, they do circuit training, they push as hard as they possibly can because they assume more effort equals more fat burned. And for subcutaneous fat, that logic has some merit. But for visceral fat specifically, the research tells a different story. High-intensity exercise, especially chronic, unsustainable. Maximum effort training elevates cortisol. Cortisol is your primary stress hormone. And here is the brutal irony. Cortisol is one of the primary drivers of visceral fat accumulation. Your body responds to the stress of extreme exercise the same way it responds to any extreme stress. It protects you by holding on to deep abdominal fat stores, because in evolutionary terms, those fat stores exist precisely for emergencies. So the harder you push beyond a certain threshold, the more cortisol you dump into your system, and the more resistant your visceral fat becomes. The Japanese study that produced the 48% reduction in visceral fat did not use brutal training. It used precision. Participants cycled for 45 minutes, twice per week. That is it, 2 sessions. But they did it at a very specific intensity, 75% of their VO2 peak, not maximum effort. Not a casual stroll, exactly 75%. This zone sits right at the metabolic threshold where your body preferentially burns fat as its primary fuel source rather than glycogen. Below this zone, your body is not working hard enough to aggressively mobilize visceral fat. Above this zone, you shift into anaerobic territory, cortisol rises, and the fat-burning signal diminishes. The 75% zone is where visceral fat is the most vulnerable, and you do not need a laboratory to find it. The talk test will get you there. If you are exercising and you can hold a comfortable conversation without any effort, you are below the zone. If you cannot string a sentence together and you feel like the floor is rising to meet your face, you are above it. The right zone feels like this. You can speak in complete sentences, but you would honestly rather not. You sound slightly winded, like someone who just climbed 4 flights of stairs and answered a question at the top, alert, breathing noticeably harder than normal, but fully in control. That is 75%. That is where the 48% reduction happened. And the choice of exercise is almost irrelevant. Cycling worked in the study, but brisk uphill walking, rowing, swimming, jogging at a comfortable pace, even a fast walk with a weighted backpack will put you in this zone if you calibrate the effort correctly. What matters is the duration, 45 minutes, the frequency, 3 to 4 times per week, and the intensity, slightly out of breath but nowhere near the edge. Now, one final trap to address, because people hear all of this and then immediately reach for the most extreme version. They stop eating entirely. They drop to 500 calories. They try to combine extreme fasting with intense daily training, and the data is very clear on what happens. Severe calorie restriction causes your body to read starvation and slow your metabolism to match. Your body is not going to helpfully burn off its emergency fat reserves while it believes a famine is in progress. It is going to protect them. Exercise does not have this problem. A landmark analysis published in the British Journal of Sports Medicine found that exercise produces a dose-dependent response to visceral fat loss. The more movement you accumulate, the more visceral fat you lose, and no metabolic ceiling was identified. It does not plateau the way dieting does. So the strategy is not deprivation, it is precision. Fueling combined with precision movement. Eat enough deeply colored, nutrient-dense food to genuinely fuel your body. Drink your matcha, move at 75% intensity for 45 minutes 3 to 4 times per week, and give the protocol time to work at the biological level it is operating on. Visceral fat does not respond to punishment. It responds to the right hormonal and metabolic environment, and now you know exactly how to create it. So let us put it together simply. Every meal adds something deeply colored, orange, red, dark green, something that grew in the ground and looks like it. That is your carotenoid shield. Every morning or before your workout, swap 1 coffee for a properly brewed matcha. No sugar. That is your molecular key. 3 to 4 times per week, 45 minutes of cardio at the talk test zone. Winded, but speaking. That is your visceral fat furnace. If this video shifted something for you, share it with someone who has been fighting the same battle and getting the same frustrating results. Hit like so more people can find it, and let me know in the comments. What has been your biggest frustration trying to lose belly fat? I read every one. I will see you in the next one.